Hello, I'm Professor Nina Hien, and welcome to About Face, your senior research project class. I chose to assign you an exercise, a writing exercise about Facebook because Facebook is initially where the inspiration for creating this class came from. Let me tell you the backstory. I was teaching a class to first-year undergraduates in 2005 about the practice of portrait photography. We were reading a chapter in a book about studio portraits in the Andes region. The portraits we were reading about were called carte de visite, which were photographic calling cards or business cards with images in a small postcard-like format. They were once used in the 19th and early 20th century for different purposes of exchange, collection, assertion of status, and the manufacturing of personal identities. They first came about in the mid-1800s when photography was becoming easier, cheaper, and more accessible to the public at large with all the shifts in photographic technology and printing. Making small portraits and getting 8 prints from one negative was now possible. Here, the mass production of portraits and a democratization of photography entered the scene. Eugène Disdéry in Paris was the man who patented this process in 1854. These kind of portable portraits were booming around the 1860s in Europe and the US during the Civil War. But they were also good for business in the European colonies. And now, even in current-day Vietnam, which had once been a French colony, people continue to call business cards carte visite, from carte de visite. In Europe, the cartes went out of vogue, first when cabinet cards, a much larger version, arrived on the scene and displaced them. Then they declined even more when the Kodak Brownie Box camera became affordable for people to take their own pictures. Back in 1854, when Disdéry initiated their production, one of his competitors was a man named Félix Nadar. Nadar was a caricaturist, journalist, novelist, balloonist, and photographic innovator. He even took the first aerial photographs, not surprisingly, from one of his balloon trips. Nadar opened a carte de visite studio in Paris in 1854, which was the same year that he completed his famous cartoon, The Pantheon Nadar, which satirized all the artists, bohemians, and celebrities of the times. To depict the different characters in this group portrait and really get a sense of their very quirky individual features that marked them as icons, he used their photographs to draw from. This prompted him to move into photography, though he was somewhat reluctant about it, saying that he had to follow this trend or resign. But through his shift, you could see the connections and interactions and interplay between different representational media. As we look at a few carte de visite that follow, you will be able to see the different motivations that underlie how they produce identity. Nadar took quite a few self-portraits, such as this one in the balloon, as well as the following one, which was an auto-portrait, which is a revolving headshot. Clearly, he perceived himself as an inventor, playing with the modern technologies that created new visions. He also took one of Ernestine, his wife, who clearly didn't want her photo taken, although maybe that was the pose that was trendy at the time. So we must recognize that not all of these portraits are democratic and subject-initiated. She may have realized that she was not particularly photogenic. On our side of the ocean appears a carte of a man named Stratton. He was a Civil War veteran who lost his arms. He would sell his portraits to supplement his army benefits between the years 1861 through 1865. Another one in the United States was of Sojourner Truth, which was shot by the famous photographer Matthew Brady in New York in 1864. This one was used to publicize and gain support for her abolitionist campaign. In the chapter of the book that we were reading in my class when this whole issue of Facebook originally came up, we viewed this man and many others who lost their individuality by becoming types rather than individual people. He is marked by his profession as an organ grinder. Other examples, from candlestick makers to lice pickers, which is the next image, appeared as carte de visite in the Andean image world of the 1800s. A couple more examples of carte de visite are of the Mexican Empress Carlota and her ladies-in-waiting by Julio Valleto in 1866. The next image is one of Our Lady of Guadalupe appearing to the Emperor and Empress in the clouds above the Cerro de las Campañas by Auguste Perret in 1862. You can see how both the form and subject matter depart from realism and create clear class and spiritual hierarchies through the composition, position, and size of the figures and layout. Anyhow, so back to my class on Facebook. As we were reading about these carte de visite and their different uses in different contexts and how they could be used for racial and social typing and stereotyping, depending on whose hands they were in and depending on what context they showed up in time-wise and location-wise, I asked the students what could a contemporary equivalent be to them. The room was silent, and then something clicked in me which now seems so obvious. A few mornings before, I had overheard several of them talking about a site called Facebook, but I didn't know much about it. So I asked the students to describe it to me, and they did. And we came to the conclusion that this was the contemporary form of the carte de visite. So they urged me to get on and promised that they would friend me, and I did, and they did. But I actually didn't start using it until a year or two later. And now I'm still wondering about it and its processes because it just keeps changing. I also find myself changing my photograph regularly because I can express the mood of the day without necessarily saying anything about it. It's a little like a mood ring. I can change my identity. I don't have to be who I am. I can also show my political allegiance or skepticism. After the first presidential election, my photo was this one. I had Obama-fied myself. But all this leaves me thinking about how even though the materiality of practices change due to technological developments and other cultural, political, and ideological shifts, the core desire for particular types of exchange which involve the presenting of self, the gifting of the visible self, and one's face as a present, and the presencing of the self in different forms, is integral to sociality. The way that the face is represented may change, but at certain points, for things to operate at the maximum communicative capacity, I wonder if it is as simple as appearing present and clearly visible. At what points does its visibility and presence become necessary? What elements are needed to make something a working face? In what circumstances may its visibility be a hindrance? In what specific ways do particular technologies change the ways that people relate and interact? And what happens if one muddles these together? And finally, which forms of interaction, if any, may be better for the maintenance of a healthier society and world? These are very large questions that we should be thinking about throughout the semester. Please take a look at this funny video when the virtual Facebook world and language intrudes on reality and becomes literal. Ask yourself what could be some of the specific elements that make the face-to-face presence so disruptive here. Think about all this before you start writing your own about Facebook assignments. I look forward to seeing what you come up with.